Welcome back to the Happy Healthy Nurse training series, and my third video in this series designed to help nurses give patients the care and compassion they deserve, but while still looking after their own health and well-being. And today I'm going to pass on the best tips and techniques that I've learned from interviewing nurses from all over the world about how to debrief and de-stress after a shift, how to leave work at work and make sure we can look after ourselves and our families on our days off and not spend them worrying about things that went on back on the ward. Now, I know most nurses understand the need to debrief, but I'm going to talk about two different aspects of debriefing that are totally different to the way it's usually taught in nursing. And keep watching to the end of this video, because the second of these is something you can quickly do in the car or the bus on the way home. But it's been proven by long-standing research to leave you less likely to be depressed and far more likely to be calmer and happier. In the first video, we talked about this idea that you cannot calm the storm, you can only calm your reaction to the storm. We learnt we can spend time in our never-ending cycle of blaming everything out there for the stress we feel. And then we make ourselves feel a bit better with all those avoidance strategies such as food and alcohol and cigarettes and everything else. Or we can invest time working on our inner self through exercise, meditation, learning about how our minds work, etc. and develop an inner calm that can handle any storm out there. In the second video in this series, we looked at how often we all make great commitments to look after ourselves and do this inner work, but often those goals fall by the wayside as we run out of time, energy and willpower. And I presented 3 strategies for sticking to our goals, including the surprising scientific evidence that shows how, in some circumstances, positive thinking can actually sabotage our best efforts. If you haven't watched the earlier videos, I recommend you do so now, even for just the bit about thinking positively, which, judging by all the comments left, was a real eye-opener for a lot of people. Thank you to everyone for all your comments and questions on the first 2 videos. I really enjoyed talking to everyone and hearing your thoughts on what I've been teaching. And in a way, you lovely nurses helped me choose what this video is going to be about. So many people mentioned that they get how important it is to care for themselves, and they can see how the goal setting and keeping strategies will work. But many people mentioned that some shifts leave them feeling so drained, so exhausted, that they can't even think of anything except going home, plonking down in front of the television with a huge glass of wine. But let me ask you, if you could change the way you think about a shift from hell, and in the process very quickly reduce how much stress you take home, and limit the negative effects a bad day has on you, would that be something you would be willing to commit to? If your answer is yes, then please keep watching, because that's exactly what I'm going to be talking about today. Neil Fletcher is a nurse I interviewed for my book, What I Wish I Knew About Nursing, and he said he uses his time going home on the London Underground to shift his mind from work time to personal time. He says, "I have always been a reflective person. I don't write diaries, but I think about things. Once I've worked through what has happened, I close that event down and move on." That may sound quite simplistic, but I think it is important to resolve things and not let them linger on. Neil has consciously set up a routine that he does after every shift at a specific time and place to work through all the stress and emotional ups and downs of a shift before he gets home. He has found a way to debrief and let things go that works for him. And judging by the feedback I've been given by the 54,000 nurses on my Facebook page, the key to this isn't particularly what you do, just that you do something. One nurse said she walks in her front door and her kids and hubby know to leave her alone till she's had the shower, as they call it. She goes straight up to her bathroom, shuts the door, then hops under a steaming hot shower. And this is the key. She doesn't come out until she is ready to be a mum and a partner again. She said, "Sometimes it takes me 5 minutes, sometimes it takes 20, and some days it takes 45 minutes. But she stays under that hot water until she's washed away anything lingering on from the day." Exercise is another great way to work through the emotions of a difficult shift, because unpleasant emotions are known to release cortisol into our bloodstream, which has many proven negative effects on our health. So many nurses say they go for a walk with their dog, others say they go for a run. One nurse mentioned that she does 20 minutes punching a heavy bag and burns off her stress, as she puts it, smashing the living hit out of something. My personal favourite way to debrief after a shift is the one a lovely nurse from New Jersey mentioned to me. She said she drives home with Bon Jovi blaring, singing her troubles away. Being a massive Bon Jovi fan myself, I'm all over that one. Now, there will be a few nurses watching this who will say, "Tell me something I don't know, Ali." But I have a different approach to all the other nurses I've come across. Firstly, most nursing leaders and managers only insist on a thorough debrief after some cataclysm, when, let's be honest, it's often only really done for legal reasons. Some type of working through your day, even if it's done on your own, has to be done after every shift. Just because nothing you would call extraordinary happened compared to an average day doesn't mean nothing extraordinary happened. We deal with things every single day that half the population would need 6 months of therapy to deal with. My husband Marty used to be a full-time stand-up comic on the UK comedy circuit. As far as most people are concerned, that would be the job from hell that they could never imagine themselves doing in a million years. And I remember many times when we'd both come home late at night and we'd be around having a cup of tea or something a bit stronger, when he'd start to tell me how the crowd were a bit intoxicated that night and were rowdy, or his West Side Story stuff didn't go that well, or whatever. At the time, I was working in emergencies, so I'd start telling him about my day, incidents like the time a young motorcyclist who was dressed responsibly in head-to-toe protective leathers and helmet but was hit by a bus. The man had died, and as we cut his leathers and took his big heavy boots off, his foot came off with it. I remember looking at my friend and colleague and just being sickened, horrified and numb at the same time. Another time I remember a young woman who was brought in with her boyfriend. They'd both been in cycling to work as there were no trains running that day. A truck had swerved to avoid the boyfriend but couldn't avoid the girl and ran over her lower limbs and abdomen, crushing her pelvis. She was so scared. I spoke to her, letting her know her boyfriend was just outside and he'd come in as soon as possible. She never saw him again. The inflatable cuff around her pelvis couldn't maintain her blood pressure and she bled out. Before our eyes, she died in resus. I was with the doctor when he told the boyfriend that she had died, and I was strong for him. But seeing him as a lonely figure out on the ambulance ramp a few minutes later, crying and sobbing, I fell apart. It could have been any one of us. I will never forget her. Seeing a patient die alone always broke my heart as well. I'll always remember as a student nurse on a medical gastro ward, a man in his 50s came in with esophageal varices. He was very ill, but had no family, no next of kin, and no friends he wanted us to contact. That shift he had a massive bleed. We tried everything to stop it, but he died. I remember crying my eyes out after that shift. I was 18 and knew from then that my mantra would be, no one should ever die alone. And I lived by this last year, when my dad, who had pushed us all away with his alcoholism and abusive behaviour, became very ill. I hadn't seen him for 10 years, mainly because I'd moved from the UK to Australia. Anyway, I heard he was very sick and rang the hospital and said they said I'd better come over. I spent the last 48 hours by his bedside, talking with him, holding his hands and crying. Even though he'd done wrong to us as kids and young people, I couldn't let him, my dad, die alone. And me, my sister, my mum, were all there when he took his last breath. And for that, I am so grateful. Now I realise I'm nobody special when it comes to stories like these. We all have patients whose names and faces we will never forget and will remember for the rest of our days. And as I said, it's not even the dramatic events that would make it into an episode of House or ER that grind you down. It's the simple fact of seeing pain on a daily basis that gets to you. From the broken arm to the lacerated face after a fall, from the homeless man admitted after being beaten up again, to the young girl who has been brought in for the 4th time with injuries that are obviously from self-harm. We've seen people find out they're pregnant, and we've seen people lose their babies. We literally see life and death on a daily basis. But after a while, we don't get to see this as extraordinary, so we just get on with it and don't worry about debriefing and looking after ourselves. And this can harden our hearts and turn us into one of those nurses we've all seen who have lost their compassion. Don't let that be you. Do something to debrief after every single day. The second aspect I want to talk about debriefing is just as important as realising we need to do it every day. And that is, we have to learn to work through our day very differently to the way it is currently being taught in nursing. Let me go into some background for a minute. In previous videos, we talked a lot about goals, and there are 2 human drives in our goals that we need to talk about for a second. Researchers have realised that our underlying human behaviour, we have 2 driving forces, to be loved and to be safe. To be loved goals are what are called promotion goals. They are goals where we are aiming for achievement, accomplishment, doing something that would make you feel like a champion. For example, running that 8K fun run when you haven't even been in a race before would be a promotional goal. The mindset to reach promotion goals is about taking risks, maximising gains and avoiding missed opportunities. Keeping us safe goals are what researchers call prevention goals. They're about avoiding danger, fulfilling responsibilities and doing things you feel you ought to do. The mindset to be successful at these goals is all about minimising losses and desperately hanging on to what you've got. When you look at these two types of goals and the mindsets involved with them, you can see that in our role as nurses, we spend almost all our day working on prevention goals, particularly in acute care. We aren't looking to get our patient to enter a fun run, we just want them to get a bit better, to stabilise, or even sometimes just to stay alive. And then we've achieved our goal. But spending our whole day in a keeping safe mindset ends up giving us nurses a negative bias as to how we interpret our day. And this is one of the biggest things that leads to an average shift wearing us out, and a stressful shift where everything that could go wrong knocks us rotten and makes us feel so low we want to run away and jump into the nearest bottle of Chardonnay and pull the cork in after us. Most importantly, this focus on keeping safe, avoiding catastrophes and our negative bias naturally affects the way we debrief with colleagues, but even more importantly with ourselves. In those quiet moments when we're alone, what do we focus on? We focus on the times we didn't keep safe, the times we slipped up. We focus on the things where the system stuffed up. We focused on the times when it all went pear-shaped. This is caustic poison for our brains, and I know from bitter personal experience that it builds up over time. We need to learn a new way to review our day, and there is no better place to look than the most eminent psychologist, Martin Seligman. This guy is the grandfather of positive psychology and one of the top psychologists in the world. And he has done vast amounts of research into how our minds work and what makes us flourish and thrive. He insists that his own family do this exercise, so that's good enough for me. When you've finished your shift, whether it was a good one or an absolute shocker, you have to get out your journal, scrap paper or your iPhone note-taking app and write down at least 3 things under the heading, "What went well?" You must put down at least 3 things, even if they're not dramatic. They can be the symptom you noticed that saved a life, but they could also be as simple things like a touch on the hand that you gave a patient that made them smile as they drifted off to sleep. The patient who had been aggressive all week, who teared up and just said, "Thank you, nurse." Then next to each thing, you have to answer the question, why did this happen? So for the symptom you noticed, you might write, "Because I listened to my nursing intuition and was brave enough to follow it." And for the touch on the patient's hand, it could be, "Because I believe every patient deserves to be treated like they are my family." Seligman says in his amazing book Flourish that if you do this exercise every day for 6 months, his research has proven that you will be less depressed, less anxious, happier, and absolutely addicted to this exercise. It's absolutely wonderful to look back on these records later too. My hubby and I have been doing it for about 4 years now, using a great iPhone app called Wonderful Days. And you can open it up and see the photos you've loaded into it and see a record of all the wonderful things that have gone well over the years. You literally tear up with gratitude seeing all the great things you would have otherwise forgotten. Hopefully now you've decided to set a goal to look after yourself, and you've decided to take your own health and happiness and well-being just as importantly as that of your patients. When you keep working away on yourself and building this inner core of calm and resilience, where you work on the things you can change instead of trying to calm the storm, where you use scientifically proven methods to stick to your health and happiness goals through the bad days and the good, and where you debrief every single shift, focusing on what went well along with what needs to improve, then nursing becomes more peaceful, less frantic and exhausting. While there are always ups and downs, you'll find you spend far less time riding the emotional roller coaster and far less energy going out with fixing yourself up after a bad shift. You'll build an inner reserve of calm and strength, which will mean you have far more time and energy for family, friends, and being a much better nurse. If you've read any of my issues of Wellbeing for Nurses magazine, you'll know that it is my biggest passion and my big reason why for doing this course. So thank you for all your comments through this series. It's been so much fun for me hanging out in the comments section, answering your questions and comments. There have been so many people come through, my eyes were hurting from reading them all, so I'm thrilled these videos have been having a great impact. But I've also had a lot of you lovely nurses coming through saying they'd like to take this training a bit further and discover even more tips and advice that can make a practical difference to our health and happiness. So keep a lookout in your inbox for this last video talking about an online training course. We'll be opening up registrations for that in a few days. In the meantime, again, please leave any comments and questions below about the importance of debriefing, or let me know how you de-stress after a shift if it doesn't go well, and what do you do to let the heartache go and look after yourself and your family. And then it would be awesome if you could share this video with your colleagues so they can start implementing these ideas in their lives, By spreading the word, we can change nursing for the better, one nurse at a time. Until I see you in the next video about the more in-depth training course, please keep working at calming your reaction to the storm and do everything you can to be a happy, healthy nurse.